And let's give Pablo a big hand.
Good morning. My name is Pablo Seward, and the title of my talk today is Natives, Spirits, and Tourists, the Politics and Memory in Modern Rapa Nui. May 28, 2013. Eddie suddenly turned around. "It is past midnight. Tell them to get out of here," he demanded. "You're not from here, Pablo," he continued, "and when you're not from here, the Valua take heed of you and follow you into your dreams." End quote. After 6 weeks of participant observation and 50 interviews with the Rapa Nui of Easter Island in June-July 2013, I came to understand that Valuas are, minimally, the spirits of ancestors who remain on the island after death and take care of the property of their kin. But what else are these Valuas, and what else could they be? Simplistically put, my research takes place on Easter Island, located in the South Pacific Ocean. However, I think it is more precise to say that my research takes place at the intersection of Easter Island and Rapa Nui, the name the natives use to refer to their island today. I argue that these two names constitute two different spatial imaginaries that have historically developed around the island I study. Easter Island is the place that 80,000 or so tourists choose to visit each year. Dutch explorer Roggeveen, who discovered the island for Europe on Easter Day in 1722, coined the name Easter Island. It is close to the District of Columbia in size, that is, extremely small, and in high season and at one time, there are more tourists than natives on Easter Island. Easter Island has a capital, Hangaroa, an airport, and 8,000 archaeological sites. Rapa Nui, on the other hand, is the place the Rapa Nui know. As of yet nameless natives coined the name Rapa Nui to refer to themselves in 1862. That is, almost a century and a half after the name Easter Island was coined. 1862 is also the year that slave raiders on Easter Island killed most of the carriers of Rapa Nui oral tradition. As a result, scholars of the Rapa Nui consider 1862 the year that Rapa Nui culture was lost. And yet, paradoxically, it is the year in which I contend Rapa Nui per se was born. Rapa Nui speaks to a place that is a boundless cosmos. As the Rapa Nui call it, it is the Pito o Tehenua, the navel of the world. Rapa Nui is host to humans, according to the last census, 3,000 or so natives, and an innumerable number of mythical beings, including the Valua. As seen on the map, each place on Rapa Nui has a name, and every stone is an archaeological feature. My research question then asks how natives may practice an alternative system of memory in order to transform the Easter Island of tourists into a Rapa Nui of natives and spirits. For the purposes of this talk, I focus on how the notion of Valua, spirit, may act as a means by which memory becomes power and may enable such a transformation. I outline the process of this transformation via the conception, the production, and the circulation of knowledge practices of memory in Rapa Nui. I will now proceed to explain the conceptual frameworks I use and to give a brief account of the development of global tourism on Easter Island. I use Foucault's concept of power and knowledge to frame my discussion on the politics of memory in Rapa Nui. Foucault writes, quote, there is no power relation without the correlative constitution of a field of knowledge, nor any knowledge that does not presuppose and constitute at the same time power relations, end quote. I use the term discourse to refer to what Foucault here terms field of knowledge, and contend that the spatial imaginaries of Easter Island and Rapa Nui are best understood as a result of dichotomous discursive formations along history. I argue that it was scholars who truly constituted the first of these discursive formations, namely that which gave birth to Easter Island. Throughout the 20th century, indeed, scholars, in particular archaeologists, accomplished the transformation of ceremonial sites and other native places into an enormous open-air museum, ideal to meet the insatiable curiosity of cultural tourists around the globe. Heyerdahl, perhaps the most famous of these, visited the island in 1955 and was the first person to re-erect Moai, the 1,000 or so specimens of which had all been toppled by natives in the 18th century. Heyerdahl also wrote a bestseller, which opened Easter Island to the world. By today, generations of scholars have restored all major Moai platforms and have constituted a solid field of knowledge around Easter Island, to the point that many Rapa Nui directed me to resident scholars to implore about the island's lost past. The spatial imaginary formulated by the discourse of Easter Island even became a virtual reality in the Hollywood movie Rapa Nui of 1993, seen on the screen. Unlike the discursive formation of Easter Island, the discursive formation of Rapa Nui is based on oral history and other mnemonic devices that are more difficult to track. I now proceed to outline how the Rapa Nui today are conceiving, producing, and circulating knowledge practices of memory that discursively form an ever more solid spatial imaginary, that of Rapa Nui, that is coming to contest the hegemony of Easter Island. I investigate the role of the notion of Barua in this process. I will now proceed to the first of my findings. For the Rapa Nui, I argue, memory is conceived as a knowledge practice. Indeed, the Rapa Nui term for memory, ma'u, is rooted in the term for to know, or ma'u. In Rapa Nui, in other words, to know is to remember. Remembrance in Rapa Nui, in turn, is the function of place, such that each place on the island evokes a certain memory. Memory is something you practice as you move from place to place around the island. The past takes the form of a'amu, or tales, which most often narrate an encounter with one or more baruas, and which are told in the place they once occurred, as in the examples shown in the map on screen. The landscape in Rapa Nui is thus better understood as a memoryscape, which both shapes and is shaped by the past. As a result, any contemporary changes on their landscape, as those wrought by global tourism, changes the Rapa Nui's memoryscape, and therefore their past. I explore this theme using the Manutara bird petroglyph as an example. These petroglyphs have become, according to the spatial imaginary of Easter Island, relics of the past that reference a romantic ancestral ritual known by tourists as the Birdman cult. But for some Rapa Nui today, the Manutara is not a relic of the past. It is alive. Such is the case with Rapa Tepano, considered one of the few authentic transmitters of Rapa Nui medicine. In an interview, Rapa told me about a dream of hers, where, quote, I saw birds of steel bombarding this beautiful culture of mine, this beautiful people, this beautiful land of ours, birds of steel everywhere, end quote. Rapa later revealed to me that in her dream, she traveled to Orongo, where most Manutara petroglyphs are located, where the Barua communicated the vision of birds of steel to her. Birds of steel, I think, would be all those who got to Rapa Nui by means of an airplane, and who bombard the Rapa Nui with questions and answers and inventions and fads. By using the notion of Barua to reconceive such an important landmark as the Manutara, if Rapa is successful in communicating her vision to her people, she will be effectively reimagining the landscape of Rapa Nui and enabling her people to change their memoryscape and to remember a different past. I will now proceed to the second of my findings. The reason that A'amu are told in the place they once occurred is because in reality, according to the Rapa Nui cosmology, each time they are told, they occur again. The Barua of the A'amu continue to be present where the tale took place, and reenact the tale every time a person remembers one. Kai Kai, seen on the screen, is a Rapa Nui form of folklore. It consists of an iconographic rendition of an A'amu by means of string figures. The person you see in the image is Isabel Pacarati, widely considered as the master of Kai Kai alive today. The string figures Isabel is showing literally represent Barua. In the image, for example, the string figures represent the seductive pair of two Baruas that are the protagonists of the A'amu Isabel is performing. Kai Kai is always accompanied by a patautau, or recitation, that invokes the Barua to reenact the A'amu through the string figures. Kai Kai, I contend, is alive and opens up a space where an alternative field of knowledge about the past may be produced. The rhythmical movements of Kai Kai you see in the video is a method to entrance the viewer and to enable him or her to come into contact with the Barua and produce new memories about the past. By producing a revealing memory via Kai Kai, certain Rapa Nui, who like Kappa are contacted by the Barua to deliver knowledge to their people, may therefore initiate a collective reimagination of the memoryscape of Rapa Nui. I now proceed to the third and final of my findings. It seems to be the case that once knowledge practices of memory are conceived and produced in the way of spelled above, and need only to be circulated in order to be constituents of a field of knowledge around Rapa Nui, these reimaginations of the past may be divorced from the world of the Barua and may directly enter that of Danata, or humans. They may even enter spaces whose creation was enabled by the economics of global tourism, like auditoriums at hotels and at the museum, and the local Manugena radio. I think the venue of the radio is an interesting case. In such a small community as Rapa Nui, with 3,000 people, information often travels faster by word of mouth than through radio waves. Thus, I contend the radio is used by the Rapa Nui less to inform than to officialize a certain communal position, in some instances with respect to a reimagined past. Another revealing case was insinuated to me by renowned Rapa Nui artist Beppo Huke, who shared with me an upcoming project of his. In November, Beppo will present an exposition of 40 paintings depicting controversial events in Rapa Nui history in the lobby of Hotel by Moana, shown in the photo. One of his paintings, for example, depicts Heyerdahl in a wanted sign, quote, to show the dark side of Heyerdahl's work, end quote. Later in his interview with me, Beppo revealed that his paintings are inspired by his routine morning talks with the Barua in his, quote, corner of Baruas, end quote. Yet Baruas play no explicit role in Beppo's exposition. Stripped from its conception and production in the esoteric world of Barua, the circulation of knowledge practices of memory around Rapa Nui is thus open to all people, not just to Rapa Nui people. This allows the spatial imaginary of Rapa Nui the potential to become global, like that of Easter Island. It may not be far-fetched to think, indeed, that just as the Rapa Nui movie from Hollywood objectified the discursive formation of the island as Easter Island, Beppo's exhibition seeks to objectify the discursive formation of the island as Rapa Nui. I now proceed to my conclusion. So, my research question asked how the politics of memory in modern Rapa Nui might empower the Rapa Nui under the current social conditions of global tourism. I found and outlined the ways in which the notion of Barua is used to conceive, produce, and circulate knowledge practices of memory that challenge the mainstream version of the past I associate with the name Easter Island. I would now like to return to the opening scene of this talk, when Eddie implored me to tell them to get out of here, in reference to the Rapa Nui. Why does Eddie want them to leave if, according to my study, the Baruas are positive agents of change in Rapa Nui? Unlike most of the thousands of studies done on Easter Island so far, my study does not focus on the ruins of the past. It focuses on the ruins of the present. But I do not pretend to open the eyes of the Rapa Nui to the inestimable ruins of their present through my research. That would be way too pretentious. For all I know, in fact, the many cautions I received that talking about the Barua in interviews may actually invoke the Barua and that they can hurt me took effect one night when I suddenly got food poisoning in a cave while listening to an A'amu. Perhaps it was the shadows of my antecessors like Heyerdahl and many others, that enticed the Vadua to attack me. Perhaps, too, the Vadua were tormenting Eddie for hosting me, and that is why he wanted them to leave. In an era when indigenous peoples have at least superficially gained some human rights and have some sort of voice, why should an anthropologist like me speak for them? And after all, what am I doing right now? I am engaging in a knowledge practice about Rapa Nui culture. I am conceiving, producing, and circulating knowledge about the Rapa Nui on a venue we know as a research conference. And I am an outsider. I finished the speech then by stating that as an anthropologist, I am left speechless. Thank you.